In 2017, Wonderful Copenhagen boldly announced a destination strategy that would take it through 2020 and beyond. The headline read, "Wonderful Copenhagen concludes the end of tourism as we know it." It went on to say, "We pay our respect to the tourist of the past, the mass consumers and the passing days of disconnected tourism segmentation between business and leisure, city and countryside, culture and cycling. We bid farewell to an era of tourism as an isolated industry bubble of culture and leisure experts. We leave behind the days of equating tourism marketing with glossy picture-perfect advertising. We recognize the expiration of our role as the destination's promotional superstars, the official destination marketing organization with authoritative consumer influence, broadcast superiority, and an exclusive right to promote and shape a destination." Bold? Yeah, slightly. So, if 2017 marked the end of tourism as we know it in Copenhagen, then what came next? The answer? Localhood. Localhood for everyone. Copenhagen envisioned a new future where visitors were more like temporary residents than tourists, a future where the commercial opportunity of the visitor was part of life in the destination, not superior to it, not apart from it. In essence, an integrated and immersive opportunity to be Danish in Copenhagen, even if it was only for a few days or a week. One of the architects of that plan was my friend Signe Jungersted. When you meet Signe, one of the first things you notice is this incredible life force that emanates from her. Talk to Signe for more than just a couple of minutes and you realize that she is fascinated by almost everything and passionate about understanding how people and tourism, and the world for that matter, really work. Today, Signe is the CEO and a founding partner of Group NAO, a leader in guiding transformative change for destinations and companies through strategy, through ideas, and through agendas. Morning, Signe. I guess it's good evening where you are. How are you?
Good evening. Hi, David.
I had to tone it down because if I told them the truth, no one would believe me. So that's the light version. Where are you right now?
I just got home.
And you're in Copenhagen.
I'm in Copenhagen. I'm in my apartment in Copenhagen, and I just got home and it's raining outside, which is the natural summer in Copenhagen. So I just got home and dried up before this.
So it's Friday, July 3rd, 2020. What's it like there now after the sort of beginning of the end of the beginning of this crisis?
The end of the beginning, and then the insecurity of this strange parenthesis that we're in right now, where it's like it feels almost normal. Now you can almost forget to disinfect before pushing the coffee machine. So it does feel like a return to a kind of normal, a different normal, but still like we're back in the offices, restaurants are opening, borders are opening. And so, Copenhagen, well, now it's raining, but it's been really sunny for a while and everyone's just out and about. But there is also this strangeness to it. So, you kind of don't know if you believe it or if you dare to believe it. And all this news coming out from everywhere. And so I saw this graph someone did that there's like, we talk a lot about before and after Corona, but in fact, we're after Corona, but we're before the vaccine, right? So we're in this strange middle era where no one really knows what's going to happen, and it's going to go like up and down, and sideways and back, and so and I kind of have that feeling that right now in Copenhagen we feel like we're in a good place, but then I don't know. I'm waiting to see. I'm hoping that we're on the right track so far.
Well, that sounds pretty familiar. I would say that really describes it well. Probably anywhere we are here in Toronto, down in Arizona, we're all anticipating what's next, and as you like to say, we're in it. We're not apart from it, and we'll see what happens. I want to talk about Localhood.
Mm-hmm.
In 2016, if I'm correct, that word did not exist, did it?
Well, not to my knowledge, yeah. So I mean, I hadn't heard it before. So in that sense, it didn't exist in my world. So it was a word we made up.
So why local?
Well, I think because we wanted, well, we kind of wanted to come up with our own concept because we felt like we were onto something new. And so sometimes it helps coming up with your own words to reflect that. And I think localhood, because it had to feel like not a neighborhood, that's a different kind of hood. So localhood was more of an essence or an atmosphere, and it was something that you can feel. You can feel the appeal and sort of the identity of it, whether you're from that local hood or not. So yeah. So and then another thing was that it's something that is individually defined, right? So actually, if you read through the strategy document, there is no definition in there because it has to be something that you define.
Yes.
And so I made up my own definition, but it's not something that I necessarily expect everyone else to understand. So yeah, and I thought that was kind of a nice touch that we made up a word, but you get to define what it means.
Well, when you decided to make this bold foray into a whole new strategy for Copenhagen, let's talk about the situation. I mean, you were not experiencing over tourism, say, to the same level as Barcelona or Venice, but you saw clouds on the horizon, and you saw a significant shift in what destinations would have to do in the future. But talk a little bit about the ideas and forces that led you to really press the interrupt button and say, "Hang on, we're going to do something bold here." Tell me about that.
Well, it was interesting because I mean, in the afterthought and after like coming out with the strategy, it was very quickly framed into sort of a response to over tourism. But Skift, the think tank, they sort of coined the phrase over tourism in the summer of 2016, and that was in when we were working on this strategy, right? So in that sense, I did like a Google trend search at one point, and like localhood and over tourism, the two words kind of came out at the same time, and then of course over tourism took off. But so it wasn't at that point. It wasn't really. It wasn't a big issue, and it wasn't something we were talking a lot about. But there was like at that point you were talking about visitor pressure, and then I think when over tourism kind of was coined as a phrase, it made sense to everyone, so we used it a lot. But we were talking about visitor pressure, and we were seeing different European destinations experiencing visitor pressure. But the idea of declaring the end of tourism and inviting this new era of localhood was just as much based on all the other shifts and changes that were happening, like the empowered consumer with digital means, and the shift from being a destination marketing organization that could just broadcast messages, the touristic version of a place and be the authority on a place, to that shift where everyone has their phone with them, and they can access information, and they can produce information, and they can access a different kind of information at any time. And so, the whole role of the DMO, the whole way that we traveled, the way that we experience and access a destination, all that had changed. So that was really also part of the motivation for coming out with a strategy like this. And then, of course, there was the idea of, well, can tourism be more than what we think it is, because for many years we've been celebrating tourism, but how do we actually continue to make tourism a driver of the livability as well of Copenhagen, and the thrivability of Copenhagen? And I think that was when we introduced this idea of people-based growth, which I think is really one of the concepts in the strategy that I've talked the most about, but not necessarily so much when we did the strategy, but afterwards that's really become sort of an essence of localhood as well. Because the afterwards a lot of people were commenting on localhood as being only about the travelers having an authentic experience as a temporary local, but localhood is for everyone. So actually the vision of the strategy is localhood for everyone, and so that everyone also involves residents, right? It involves really everyone. And so it's all about the balance between the two, or the many.
So when you say that, I just want to point out that a couple of weeks ago, I was talking to your peer, Flavia Badeau from European Cities Marketing. The premise in that discussion was the idea that over tourism and the work that ECM had done on over tourism really was a harbinger of how we were going to recover from from COVID-19 in various places around the world. And there was a real shift back to a local focus. And the point was the lessons that ECM was learning in over-tourism were highly applicable coming out of this crisis. So I'm going to put it to you, Localhood might actually surpass over-tourism when you do your next Google search in 3 months. I think it's a really... Well, it's a super important concept. Greg Oates, formerly of Skift, talks about how destinations that had purpose-built networks of local stakeholders have fared better in this crisis. They're more aligned. They're able to move more quickly to do things that benefit residents. And I want to talk about that in the context of something I read that you wrote a while ago. When you researched essentially the schism between tourists and locals, you found out something quite remarkable, that the values and the things they cared about actually were really well aligned, and that the fact that the local and the tourist actually really aspired for the same sort of experience, it dawned on you that the rift was more perceptual than real.
Well, because in the end, it's all just people. And we talk about the tourists as if they're this really weird species that just invade us every summer and then go back to their cave somewhere. But you're the tourist, I'm the tourist, everyone's the tourist, and everyone's a local somewhere or anywhere. So everyone's just human beings, and so we have interests that drive us. We are motivated by many of the same things, and I think actually talking about the pandemic and the corona virus era that we're in right now, it kind of becomes even more clear, I think, because what a crazy time to globally all be more or less in the same situation. I think that's kind of amazing, right? We haven't talked that much about, we had this movement of like, we're all in it together and loads of hashtags and in many different varieties, but this thing that we actually all shared an experience. So it's been dealt with differently across nations and governments and so on, but the experience of the pandemic and the fear that it kind of imposes on us, and it all affects us as human beings. And so I think throughout this crisis, in many ways, we've had more in common than we've ever had before. And so coming out of it, that's going to be interesting to see how those values and that experience that we actually all share. You can meet someone from South Korea or China or somewhere in the US, and you will have the same reference, in a sense, saying, oh, remember the time when we all went in lockdown or quarantine and we weren't allowed to travel? We'll all have that memory, right? That's kind of special. We would all rather be without it, but it's special.
Well, and you were actually talking about that 3-4 years ago, because when you did that research where you realized that locals and visitors didn't have different value sets, you also realized that the articulation of over-tourism was maybe too broad a term, because what you came up with, if I remember correctly, is the thing that bothered visitors and bothered residents was traffic issues or noise issues or cleanliness issues or crowding issues. They weren't on opposite sides of the line there. They were all saying, oh, if this was my city, I wouldn't like that. Or I'm here as a visitor and I don't like it. Or this is my city and I don't like it. So,
yeah, but that's true. I think the research that you're referring to was what locals were perceiving as the sort of impact and the challenges of tourism to their local lives, and yes, traffic issues was a big thing. And it's true. Like, then if I think back to some of the surveys that we did, for example, when I first started working in tourism, it was specifically with the Chinese tourism market. And they would actually also point out like the cleanliness of a place as a thing, so you could say that actually kind of does show that tourism locals are very, they have a similar perception of being in a place and what that place does to them, or what kind of impression it leaves. True. Like traffic, cleanliness, noise and these things. Noise. But it's interesting because right now in Copenhagen, actually, because it's been really nice weather. So today is kind of the exception, actually. But it's been really nice weather, and then of course bars have to close at midnight due to the coronavirus. So we've had an outside life these days. And so the young people especially are like partying more outside than they usually do. And it's created all these noise discussions, which I think is interesting because normally whenever there are noise discussions, we always blame the tourists. Like it's always the tourists that are noisy. And I've always found that discussion to be quite interesting because like, how do you know? Like, how do you know if you're in the inner city of Copenhagen? How do you know if it's the tourist or if it's just, you know, people? And now there are no tourists and it's noisy. So I'm hoping people will remember that next time we have the discussion. So
well, and I think if I was to signate this, I'd say, you know, if we look at ourselves as people and not visitors or residents, then of course noise is annoying and traffic jams are annoying and cleanliness is desired. I think it adds an element to what Jack Johnson was talking about at Destinations International in terms of the lexicon of tourism and the community shared values piece. If you look at the community shared values, maybe with hope I say this, we're moving into a world where we need to add a segment to that pie, which is, and the traveler shares the value of the destination as well. Yeah. And then you've got this great alignment piece.
Yeah, I know. I think that's going to be the next big thing is really like value-based travel, because I think coming out of the Corona crisis as well, we've had time to reflect a little bit on our destinations and the places that we live and what kind of values we want this place to reflect. And I think moving forward, also in the way that we travel, we will be more value-based in our travel. And I think destinations will somehow also have to reflect on this, like what values do we stand for and what visitors reflect those values. So you're looking for that match in a different sense than you had before. I think Laura Alto from Helsinki Marketing also said something like this about the value-based travel. And really, I like their approach, which is, you know, they don't want to be a destination for everyone. They know that I think I heard their mayor once said that Helsinki is an acquired taste, which I thought was amazing. I love that phrase. And so also they're okay with that. So they're saying, you know, we represent a certain set of values. And so we want to attract visitors that reflect that set of values. And you see loads of destinations coming out with these reflections now, right? Like having had no visitors for a while, like the Ischgl, the Austrian ski resort place, they're coming out saying now, oh, we actually don't want party tourism anymore. Thailand is out saying we want to shift away from mass tourism to, I think they call it quality tourism or like more wealthy tourism. But there's all this shifts in terms of what kind of destination, what kind of place do we want to be, and how do we create that sense for the people here as well.
Helsinki, I have to say this, certainly an acquired taste. It's a beautiful city.
I love Helsinki.
The part I could not acquire the taste for was the rotted shark meat. No matter what I did, I couldn't stop it from streaming out of my nose and coming out of my eyes. It is just about the most scary experience in a culinary sense on earth. And the Finns, you know, they love to watch you when you do it because they like that look on your face.
But I have a philosophy, which will be a challenge for you, because my philosophy is that you'll like anything if you just eat it 10 times as if you like it. But I don't think you'll be able to do that with this.
I swear to God, it just turns every pore in your body, every opening into something. The fluid is coming out. And you're like, oh my God, it is really something. But speaking about destinations and destination management, you've been working for the past 3 years now on actually past 3 years. You left Copenhagen in 2019 to start NAO, right?
Yeah. So I've been out of the DMO for a year. Yeah.
Okay. So then you can reflect objectively. And I've watched you in various forums over the last year or two. And the funniest one I have to say was you sitting in a forum in Moscow with, I don't know how many translators in how many different languages. It was like watching Netflix. It really was.
That was an amazing experience. I had a lot of fun there. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. So when you look at destination organizations and the shift, I mean, we talked about the shift to DMMO, but over the past 3 years, since you implemented essentially a really bold strategy, or even to say it in the terms that I see it as, you worked incredibly hard at starting a movement. What do you see in emerging role of the DMO? I mean, you were a leader in the idea of digital disruption. I think it informed a lot of your thinking about what had to happen in Copenhagen as well. But talk to me about the emerging role of the destination organization, the destination management organization, the destination ECDEV organization. I don't care what people want to call it. It really is the same thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I also kind of don't care what people want to call it, but I think it's an important discussion nonetheless, like, because words do define the role, right? And I think you were referring to Jack Johnson's lexicon as well. I mean, it's importance and the power of words because it kind of does frame our way of thinking. And I think we've put so much energy into discussing the M, right? The M in the DMO, what does it stand for? And everyone at some point said, well, we are more than marketing. So now we're shifting towards management. And I was a big proponent of that as well. But in the end, the problem with management for the DMO is that it takes on a responsibility that it doesn't have as an organization. It often, at least, doesn't have the mandate to manage. so you're looking to the DMO to manage the visitor flow or manage how tourism is regulated in a city or things like this. But the DMO very often doesn't have any mandate to do that. And so I think the manager role is a bit of a challenge, really. And so that's really something that I think we need to reflect on. If it's not the manager role, what is it?
Well, and that's a really, really important and subtle distinction, because I know some great destination leaders from some of the biggest cities in the United States who really are worried about the use of that management word, exactly because of what you just pointed out, that it's a lot to bite off. I always came to it innocuously and said, well, destination organizations have a role in managing versus a management role. So it never bothered me as much. But I think you're shedding light on the idea that the destination organization has a role in management, has a role in marketing, has a role in product development. That balanced approach is okay with me. And I think it's really good for you to sort of expand on that, because I think it gives destination CEOs a chance to say, oh, hang on a second, I don't have to be afraid of this word. It's not about running the entire destination. But you make a really great point. Maybe we need to change the word.
Yeah, I think so, because I think we need to, for the DMO to remain relevant or reinvent its relevance, maybe better, I think we have to shift that. We have to shift the mindset of manager. I mean, you can just look at any organization, and the most frustrating role will be the middle manager with no mandate to manage, right? That's like the one position that no one wants to have.
Right.
And also, you do not become a manager by saying that you're a manager. You become a manager by being respected, by taking the lead, by doing and showing that you have the capacity to do. And you were, I mean, just now you were saying, I know destination leaders. Maybe leader is a better word,
Sure, absolutely.
Leader is a role that you can take upon yourself by showing that you're setting a direction, you're moving somewhere. But it could also be, Jack Johnson is saying that it's a community asset organization, or, how do we reinvent this? Because I think even shifting further from marketing or management, what the DMO really needs to do is also look at how do we make tourism relevant to the communities that we are part of. So rather than putting tourism at the center of the discussion, maybe make tourism, the resource to support other agendas of that community, and that will make that community more resilient, stronger in the long term. And so, I think a lot of DMOs will be in a position where they will need to adjust, where they will need to be the learning organization, or they will need to be the leadership organization, or the lobbying organization, or, the love of a place organization. I don't know, but it could be loads of different things, right? But I think that reinvention will be really important also coming into this next era of whatever we're facing on the other side of this pandemic experience that we've been through.
Well, and I think in talking to Jack, he would say, you don't get to do the same thing you've just said. You don't get to declare yourself a leader. Other people decide that you're leading.
Yes, exactly.
And building that Leviathan is hard work. The work you've done over the past years with Copenhagen, it's not, and I don't want to diminish the work of marketing. It's incredible work. I'm a trained marketer at my core. That's what I went to school for. But in the end, building intentional networks, working with multiplicities of stakeholders, it's a difficult proposition, but it's the one that can bear the most fruit in the most sustainable manner, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, when you were saying that, I just realized that if you do like the DLO, we were talking about leadership, you can also have like the destination localhood organization. Maybe the L is for localhood. No, but I think it's really important.
That's a great word. No.
Yeah. So yeah, and I think even now, like coming out of this trial, in many ways, like this is really the time of, demonstrating what the DMO can do. So rather than going into hibernation while, there were no tourists, I think a lot of DMOs have been using that opportunity to become more relevant to their local community. But I also think that if they haven't, then it will be really difficult to come out in 2-3 years saying that, oh, we really want to be there for the locals. It's important that tourism, is aligned with the locals. If you didn't do it now, why would you do it in 2 years? I think your credibility will be really, really challenged unless you actually have that conversation now, because there is a momentum right now, right? And you have this whole like idea of building back better and the new possible. You need to involve your local population, your local community in a conversation on how do we rebuild to make this, better? How do we come out stronger on the other side of this? And then do it together. The DMO shouldn't be a separate entity that just works on its own agenda. It has to be integrated into the whole ecosystem of a community.
So as we come out of this, or as we come out of previous crises in the past, here we had a respiratory infection called SARS in 2003.
Mm-hmm.
It was totally understandable and acceptable in 2003 that the best thing we could do as government organizations was to stimulate marketing. That's not the case today. We are not going to advertise our way back to success. And frankly, the capacity to serve people coming from far markets won't be here for a while. So what do you say to destination organizations as they look at their strategic planning now? It's a hard shift to go from, an organization that's heavily vested in large scale marketing to what do we do next?
Yeah, and I think you'll need to engage kind of like head first into that conversation. Don't be scared of the conversation, because if you're scared of the conversation, someone else will have it without you around the table. So I think you need to engage in like what is now the success criteria of the DMO, but also tourism into communities, because it will be different. And I think we're going into an era where we'll have less. It will be a world less traveled, at least for a foreseeable time. And so our whole business model and our way of, measuring success in terms of bed nights, for one, we've talked for ages about how that measure of success has to change. Well, you have a pretty good opportunity to do it now, because you will by necessity, but then in the long term, that will also create a more sustainable tourism development for you if you manage to reinvent those success criteria and maybe measure the quality of tourism in a different essence, or in a different way, like or maybe not even the quality, but the contribution of tourism, I think would be an interesting approach.
So if you could give us a reading list of things or places to study, what's on your list that you would say to people, have a look at this, have a look at that. It can help inform as you create new strategies and recovery models. Where do you see work that you like?
Well, lots of places. I mean, but there are always some really, Helsinki, I already mentioned Helsinki, but I really like their philosophy and their way of approaching it. And I feel they're head first into the conversation, which I really find very impressive and inspiring. I think, Amsterdam has been out with the donut economy, and that also reflects into how they'll be working with tourism, which I think is really interesting. I think loads of places, they're really starting that conversation with locals as well. I mean, in France, not specifically for tourism, but they launched the initiative quite early on in the crisis called Le Jour d'après, so the day after. So very early in the crisis, they actually started discussing what will the day after look like, and they did an open consultation on that with the population, which I found very inspiring. And I just saw Melbourne is doing something similar, like what will the city of the future look like, inviting people in to discuss this. So yeah, I think there are lots of really good examples on how to approach this. I think one of the key issues will also be remembering, like, doing this in a sustainable way, because it's really difficult to backtrack, and that's what we were experiencing before the crisis, right? We were in a desperate situation to kind of backtrack some of the things that we were realizing now didn't really work. I think it's the Danish philosopher, now I'm like venturing into something where I'm a little bit I'd say, but the Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard, he said, you can only live life. How do you say that in English? You can only live life like moving forward, but you understand it moving backwards, or like.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I have the phrase in Danish in my mind, but I think it kind of makes sense. But now with the coronavirus, maybe he would have rephrased it, right? Because now we actually kind of had that pause to stop and reflect on what way we were going, and we have a chance now to change the direction moving forward. Yes.
Well, that's a theme that comes up, and leaders all over have shared that with us on the show. Amir Elon from Longwoods literally said, you can't go forward looking in the rear view. I mean, look, see it, and then move on. Greg Clausen from 2031 said the exact same thing. Here we are in the pause. What do we do next?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always a great pleasure to talk to you. I know it's Friday night in Copenhagen, and everybody's gone out to have some fun except you. So I feel bad for keeping you.
It's good. No, I always enjoy talking to you as well. So this is a good way to spend your Friday evening.
well, thank you for that. Thanks for being our guest, and I hope you come back and do it again.
I hope so too. Thanks for having me.